Interesting story about what can happen when people are divorcing in a sort of a high conflict way. Emotions typically run high in any divorce or separation, often evoke feelings of fear and uncertainty. Well, for someone who is experiencing domestic abuse, initiating a divorce can be fatal. According to StatsCan, between 2003 and 2013, police services reported 960 homicides committed against intimate partners in which the victim was a current or former spouse, common law partner, or dating partner of the perpetrator. Of these, 747 were committed against a female victim, and the largest demographic group were age 20 to 44. Joining us to talk about this is Rick Patica of Shulman Partners LLP. Rick, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you on.
Hi, Barb. Thank you for having me.
It seems that there is probably a very wide definition of domestic violence, and I wonder if some people don't even recognize that they're involved in a situation of domestic violence. Can you tell us exactly what the definition is?
Well, domestic violence can occur in various ways. It could be as extreme as physical violence against one spouse or another, or the children or another member of the family, or it could take place as a form of emotional abuse, psychological abuse, or even financial abuse, where you have one party who's in the position of holding the finances, controlling the finances to the extent that the other person finds it difficult to maintain day-to-day living.
And I'm not sure if you mentioned that, and if you did, I didn't catch it. Apparently, it also can be just around threats to harm people without actually doing anything.
That's correct. There is also the threat as well of harm, but there's also then carrying out the actions as well.
Do you ever meet people in your practice that are telling you their story and they don't even realize they're involved in a situation of domestic abuse or domestic violence?
Oftentimes, and the answer to that question is yes, I have, and oftentimes when I'm meeting them for the first time, and part of the goal is I want to try to understand the history of the relationship right from the beginning, because usually there's telltale signs early on as to when the violence or any abuse happens, and eventually there's an escalation to it. So I try to gauge it in that sense.
Do you ever end up referring clients to therapists or psychologists in addition to, the legal part of the divorce?
That's correct. I do, and oftentimes one of the questions I will ask if they have obtained any counseling or therapy, and if not, are they open to it?
Okay. So there are, there are some people who separate and divorce amicably, and there are some, I think we've all seen both examples, and there's a lot of anger and there's a lot of tension, and we heard about the guy yesterday who burned $1 million so that his wife couldn't get it. People do all kinds of things, but your law firm, Shulman Partners LLP, you have some top strategies that you would advise for people to stay safe in a potentially abusive situation if you are going through a separation or divorce. So maybe we can go through some of those.
Sure.
Okay. So this one is really interesting because I've actually seen something explosive along these lines with someone I know. Don't stay present when serving divorce papers. Can you explain that?
Oftentimes when there's violence or the threat of violence, and at least there's a history of it, one of the concerns is whether by starting a court process, whether that's going to further aggravate the problem. And if that's the case, then we want to put a strategy in place or a plan in place that at the time when the spouse or the controlling spouse is about to be served with the court papers, that the other spouse, the victim spouse, we'll call them, is not around, because that's just going to further escalate them or potentially put their lives in danger.
And this can be especially volatile if the two are still living together.
That's correct. And oftentimes they really are. They haven't really physically separated. They're carrying on their marriage in the home, even though they may be in separate rooms altogether, but still. oftentimes you'll find the case that they're still living under the same roof.
And along with that is a suggestion to develop a safety plan with steps for your protection, or if kids are involved. What would a safety plan involve?
A safety plan may involve having an urgent motion being brought to a court.
Oh, I see.
To allow the victim's spouse to have, let's say, exclusive possession of the home, and a restraining order in place that will then be filed with the court and with the police at the same time.
And if someone feels that they're in danger, I think people are really hesitant to get the police involved, but sometimes I guess police intervention is necessary.
It is, and especially if there's a history that there's been physical violence and other forms of violence, then the police is required.
Okay, and one final thing, and this is a really good one, because I think that a lot of times in these situations, spouses may have a tendency to sort of spy on the other, try to get into their email, see what they're doing, communications with lawyers. So really, people should be creating new accounts with new passwords.
That's correct, and oftentimes when you find cases where there's abuse or violence, really it's a power struggle between one spouse against the other, and one party trying to impose their will or power over the other, and that often has signs of the controlling spouse trying to keep track of the other spouse. There's cases where they put hidden software on the computer without the other person knowing to try to see what they're up to. So there's a myriad of things that can occur.
Okay. Well, you know what? I think this is really enlightening for people because I think a lot of people who are in this situation would look at the family lawyer as the legal part, but it sounds like the family lawyer can also help if you need help on the sort of emotional side, or if there's an abusive situation. You guys can help steer the person in the right direction in terms of that as well.
That's correct, Barb, because we're lawyers at the end of the day. We're not therapists. We have no training in therapy or counseling. While we try to be empathetic, at the end of the day, you still need the professional who's going to help the victim move on with their life, and they need to do it properly.
Well, it's great news and great information as always. Rick Patica, thank you so much for this.
Thank you for having me, Barb.